Let's go across to NDTV's Vishnu Som is in conversation with IMF's giant Gopinath. Let's cut right to that conversation.
Somewhat weaker, and China also has its own challenges. Now, in terms of what countries need to do so that we have more balanced growth in the world, I think it's pretty country-specific, and it's going to vary country by country. In the case of China, there's a lot more they need to do on the property sector, bringing up domestic demand. In Europe, they have to take actions to raise productivity, get growth going, and so on. So at the same time, there are a lot of developments on the external front when it comes to geopolitical tensions, trade policy in the world. And that's something that governments around the world will have to, deal with.
Right. Well, we were looking at, you've also obviously mentioned India. It is a very large growing economy, but your words are cautionary, I would say. Growth in India also slowed more than expected, led by a sharper than expected deceleration in industrial activity. A couple of years back, we were well above 7%. The target has always been 8% plus. What does India need to do to get back to those 8% plus levels?
Yeah. I mean, firstly, just to put things in perspective, India remains the fastest growing major economy in the world at 6.5%.
Yeah.
Now, the growth is lower than what we had initially expected, and that reflects the fact that in the second half of last year, 2024, we saw a slower start to public investment following the elections. Now, we expect that to bounce back, which is going to bring back some of the recovery. We're also seeing the rural sector consumption strengthening, which is something that we had expected that it would. But more generally, in terms of getting growth to higher levels on a more durable basis, I mean, India will have to continue to do some of the things it's doing, which is public infrastructure investment, keep at it, make sure that the timelines are met, improve the ease of doing business. Being able to buy and sell land should be an easier job than what it is right now, and plugging India back into the global supply chain in a much more stronger way, which will require, cutting back some of the tariffs that they have, which are quite high.
Yeah. The target for India, of course, is to become a $10 trillion economy, to become developed, I think, by 2047. The first target of $10 trillion in terms of the Indian economy, do you believe that's achievable in the finite future?
For 2047 is a long way off.
Yes.
And the world is not remaining stationary. There's lots that happen.
Sure.
Again, it is one of those, it's a good aspiration to have, and it's going to take much bigger structural reforms than what we've seen in the last decade.
The United States you've also written about, you've said in the report that underlying demand remains robust in the United States, reflects the strong wealth effects, a less restrictive monetary policy stance. With the new Trump administration coming into power, do you see a real consolidation of the U.S. economy?
So, firstly, I think the U.S. economy has been powering along for a few years now. U.S. consumers are spending at a very healthy pace. The labor market is strong. Productivity growth has been actually surprisingly very good in the U.S. Now, what will come in the next few years depends on the details of the new administration. President Trump has announced a range of measures. We're going to have to analyze it. They're on multiple fronts, in immigration, on trade. So it's a little premature to comment on how that would work. I think what we already see is a lot of positive sentiment in the U.S. The stock market is doing extremely well. And, the U.S. is now the most popular destination for foreign direct investment. It's getting a lot of foreign capital coming in.
Yeah. Tariffs is something which, from the United States, it certainly concerns us in India as well. I was speaking to Nadir Godrej yesterday, where he said that, in the field of agriculture, that could be an area of concern. With the new Trump administration, do you believe that tariffs could be, problematic in terms of countries like India?
Again, it's going to depend on the details of how they decide what kinds of tariffs to impose, the magnitudes of these tariffs. And of course, also we need to see the reaction of countries to it. Now, what we have seen in the past, of course, if there is a unbridled tariff war with countries imposing tariffs in retaliation, it does leave the world worse off. But for now, I think we should wait and see exactly what those tariffs may look like.
China, of course, the other huge economy, and you've written, and I quote, faster than expected net export growth only partly offset a faster than expected slowdown in consumption. What are the primary, how would you look at the China story? There is also the property market and stabilization of the property market. Has that been up to scratch or up to your expectations?
Yeah. Vishnu, in the case of China, domestic demand has remained weak. consumer demand has remained weak, and that's one area where the Chinese government is focused on to try and bring back consumption spending. They've done a whole host of measures, including on the fiscal front and on monetary policy front, which is why we've upgraded the forecast for China for a little bit this year. But more is going to be needed to get money more into the hands of consumers so that they actually feel confident about spending it. In terms of dealing with unfinished homes that were sold previously, that is an issue that still needs tackling, because for a lot of Chinese, that's where their wealth is, and as long as you don't see them getting the homes that they paid for, that can be a very negative sentiment. So recognize that the government is doing a lot in terms of measures. More will be needed, more in terms of getting the private market economy also to be a bigger contributor, and also relying less on external demand and more on domestic demand.
Artificial intelligence, it's a huge theme over here. For the last couple of years at the World Economic Forum in Asia, there are all sorts of questions. Is it an enabler? Does it potentially take jobs? There is also the entire issue of equity and AI. So in the context of Asia, how do you see AI and growth?
Firstly, there's a lot of uncertainty still in terms of what AI will do for economies in the world. We have estimates of how much it can help in terms of raising productivity, and it's either 0.1 percentage point every year or 0.8 percentage point every year. Given that world growth is at 3% on average, if you get to 0.8, that's a large number, but we don't know that yet. And then yes, of course, there are the labor market effects. So if you look at India, for example, our estimate is that about 26% of India's workforce is exposed to AI, but about 14% will benefit from AI, and the remaining 12% will have more of a displacing effect. So a lot depends upon what gets done in terms of building digital public infrastructure, skilling the workforce so that they can use the new technology that's there. And also you need to have an environment for innovation, starting businesses, all of that to be able to make use of this.
Gita Gopinath, wonderful speaking to you. There you have it, Gita Gopinath telling us about the overall international situation, why there are lower than expected, perhaps, historical growth numbers. The India story, India is a very large economy, but a lot more perhaps needs to be done to get back to those 8% growth levels. China, the United States, and of course, artificial intelligence. I suspect that no one really knows where AI is headed going into the future. It's back to the studio.